Energy, obviously. We sit on a continent that is really struggling with energy at the moment. And if you've spent any time in South Africa, I'm sure you've noticed that South Africa is struggling. So we're looking at energy in general, not just nuclear, although that is still our priority. We have a wind company called Nova Wind, and we are actively exploring that on the continent and particularly in South Africa. And then obviously we're pursuing our nuclear agenda. We have intergovernmental agreements signed with various African nations, and we're trying to assist them in achieving their nuclear ambitions. Certainly South Africa. South Africa has a base and a long history of nuclear power. They've been operating Koeberg for over the last 35 years, very successfully and very safely. They've been operating Safari 1 reactor, a research reactor, for over 55 years, which means that all of the legal regulatory bases are there for them to move forward on a nuclear new build now. We see a lot of potential in other African nations, and a lot have done a great deal in terms of nuclear infrastructure development, Ghana, Nigeria, Zambia, and Rwanda. I think it's important to firstly note that each country is very different, particularly when implementing a nuclear program. So as a responsible vendor, we really work with different countries and look at their specifics and try and tailor-make a solution for them. That's not to say that we don't learn lessons on each of our builds, but it's also to note we've built over 80 VVR reactors outside of Russia. So we have a great deal of experience dealing in foreign countries. So I would say that, as a responsible vendor, we really work at a scale and a pace with the countries that are interested in nuclear power to implement a program that's going to be safe and sustainable in the long term. It's very important. I think Africa is important to the world. It's certainly important to Russia, and it's certainly important to us at Rosatom. We see great potential on the continent, not just with nuclear energy for electricity, but also nuclear research, nuclear medicine, and various other applications for nuclear technologies. And then outside of the nuclear sphere, wind and battery storage, where we are very active as well, we see great potential. In Russia, we have implemented 1 gigawatt of wind power. It's a relatively new domain for us. We aim to have installed 1.7 gigawatts of wind in Russia by the end of this year. And we have now taken that and moved into the international markets, and Africa being one of our key priorities. So we're looking at various different projects here in South Africa. We've identified certain sites that we believe are worthwhile developing on the large scale, both for municipal and corporate offtake. And then we're actively exploring opportunities in Ethiopia as well. Generally very positive. We haven't really had any issues on the continent. I think there's a long-standing relationship between Russia and African nations, and I think we are able to build on that. As I said earlier, Africa is really struggling when it comes to power, and as Rosatom, we are able to provide solutions that are going to assist them in a sustainable long-term future. I think various different reasons. I think policy has a great deal to do with that, and I think that a positive policy shift would really bring private investment into Africa. I don't think that Africa can solely rely on funds and government sort of loans to solve its problems. So I think that the policy in Africa generally needs to change to become more suitable for private investments. I do, yeah. I think Kenya is a very good example of that. And they've done great strides in the last number of years in their last mile project, and they've connected a lot of people to the grid that generally didn't have electricity before. So there's definitely positive movements across the continent in terms of electrification. I think a key one is obviously nuclear medicine. Although Africa itself is very limited when it comes to nuclear medicine, South Africa is advancing quite quickly, particularly in terms of the detection of cancer and various other ailments or illnesses. And that would be through SPECT and PET-CT scanners. And then there's obviously various different nuclear medicine therapies that are able to assist in cancer treatments. And in general, these therapies are very invasive, they are very focused, and they can really save lives. So we're seeing an expansion of nuclear medicine across the continent, which is very promising, and I think it's going to be massive for the continent. There's so many people on the continent that simply go undiagnosed when it comes to cancer. I think it has to be realistic. Africa is advancing, and there are incredibly intelligent, incredibly motivated people across the continent. And we've got students, over 400 students, that are currently studying various different disciplines in Russia. And I think that it certainly is a possibility, and I think it is something that the continent has to pursue. We have 2 uranium assets on the continent. We've got one in Tanzania called Mkuju River, and we actually plan to have our first pilot plant up and running by June this year. And then we are very actively exploring a site in Namibia, and we are currently busy with the preliminary phases of exploration, but we believe it to be a very, very suitable site for in-situ leaching. And once we have concluded our exploration work, we believe it's going to be a very important asset globally. In terms of strengthening our relationships, we're a very responsible vendor. Sustainability for us is vitally important. So everything that we do, we make sure that it includes local communities, that we always protect the environment, and obviously human resource development and localization is vitally important for us. I think firstly it's important to differentiate between uranium mining and eventual nuclear fuel. There's a number of processes that happen in between that before you're able to provide enriched uranium and then fabricated fuel, right? In terms of our uranium mining assets, we've got a number across the world, and we abide by all of global best practices as well as local and international legislation. Again, as a very responsible vendor, we make sure that we protect our staff first and foremost, then the environment and the local communities. And then we have a very long and successful nuclear waste program that's been developed in Russia. So we are able to do everything that we do in a sustainable manner, with people and the environment being put first. So I think, differentiating us from other companies is really the responsibilities and the programs and strategies that we put in place around everything that we do to make sure that it brings no harm to any people and to the environment. We're a company that's been around for 65 years, and we plan to be around for far longer. So, we really make sure that everything that we do is absolutely correct and for the benefits of the local community and the world. So we have those 400 students studying on full bursaries at various different institutions in Russia, and they would then feed back into various nuclear programs on the continent. Beyond that, we've got Train the Trainer, and we've got various different university agreements. So between MEFI in Russia and various universities on the continent, as well as Tomsk Polytechnic University. So we have programs that we would run together and develop strategies as well as coursework for local universities to be able to train people. We understand that human resources are absolutely critical to make any project work, particularly in the nuclear industry. It is a very stringent and very specific industry, and we need people that are highly qualified and highly trained to participate in these programs. So for us, long before we even start intergovernmental relations or contractual relations, we start with human resource development. And that's done on our side to ensure that we are able to negotiate firstly with highly trained customers and then successfully implement projects. Renewable energy is certainly going to play a major role in energy in Africa, and we can see that already, right? But I don't think we can set aside conventional energy. It's going to play a role in the continent. We're going to use coal, we're going to use oil, and that's really going to be to balance the intermittency that renewables bring, right? So certainly it's going to be an energy mix, and it has to be. We can't just focus on giving people electricity, although it is a key thing to do, but we need to grow industry. Africa, unfortunately, to many extents, has missed the third industrial revolution, right? And now we're looking at the fourth. But I think we need to go back and we need to say, look at all of the minerals under the ground of Africa. They need to be refined in Africa. In order to do that, you need masses of energy. So for that reason, I believe that conventional energy is going to play a role, and I think that nuclear has to play a role in terms of green baseload power. I mean, it is the most reliable, it is the most efficient, and it is the greenest source of energy. No, I don't believe so, not in Africa. I believe that the solutions that we are offering are solutions that are required, that are needed. We're a very reliable partner, and that's been proven globally. So African nations are still looking at us to assist them with their nuclear ambitions. And obviously, there will be some logistical issues and some financial issues that have arisen, but we're a very flexible company, and we are able to work around that, and we're able to work with our partners to overcome any hurdles. I certainly hope not, but everything is a possibility. We remain a very responsible and a very reliable partner, and I think that our technology and our solutions speak for themselves. In terms of our technology, it is generation 3+. We have 34 units under construction globally, and that makes us the leader in terms of nuclear power in the world. I think that's recognized. I think the fact that we are supplying over 50 countries either enriched uranium or fabricated fuel, it also speaks for itself. So in terms of a reliable partner going into the future, I don't think anyone can overlook Rosatom. We are isolated and we have limited resources. If I take South Africa for an example, in terms of baseload energy, we've really got coal and nuclear. We don't have large-scale hydro, and we don't have a gas pipeline at this point in time. So I think we're going to have to look at it from what is required. We always advocate for an energy mix. As I said earlier, we have a wind company, we supply battery storage, so we're not opposed to any other electricity sources, but we believe that it needs to be a balanced mix that is firstly good for the environment, but secondly is able to stimulate industry, and you're not going to do that without large baseload power. We have to focus on industry. If we want to pull Africa out of the situation it is, we need to create jobs, and to do that we need to build industry, and industry is going to require huge amounts of electricity. There's over 650 million people on the continent that do not have access to electricity. In many cases it's dire, beyond children not being able to study at night because they simply don't have access. There's also the issue of cooking. So a lot of cooking is done with fossil fuels, it's done with wood, which is obviously detrimental to people's health. A great deal needs to be done in terms of uplifting Africa from an energy perspective. Most African countries are doing a lot in terms of their energy strategy, in terms of putting things in place to make electrification possible. I alluded to Kenya earlier. I think there's a lot of other African countries that are doing very good jobs in terms of putting in place what's needed to be able to attract the investment required to electrify their nations. And then in terms of specific projects, we worked on a fantastic project here in South Africa. It was called the Isotope Project. South Africa has a great issue with rhino poaching. So we partnered with Wits University and we looked at a very, very niche way of curbing rhino poaching in the country. And essentially the idea behind the project was inserting trace amounts of radioactive isotopes into the horns of rhino, and firstly making it all that more difficult to transport. Portal monitors at ports, and if you are caught with industrial radioactive isotopes, you may find yourself in a great deal of trouble. And secondly, what it did was it aimed to reduce the demand for rhino horns. So large campaigns were taken out in Asia, for instance, saying that South African rhino horn may be radioactive. And when you consider that people were grinding it up and ingesting it, I think it made it slightly less attractive. The nuclear industry is an incredibly fascinating industry, and there's always something new, and there's always something promising. And the great thing about our industry is that everything that we do is for the betterment of the world and humankind.